Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to tonight's Friday Night Mike, and a lot to talk about with the schedule announcements finally coming out. Thanks for joining me on the road for this edition. I planned a little weekend off and decided I'd go ahead and go. And of course, all that news broke yesterday. And what an exciting day, though, for the SEC to finally come out with their schedule model. And I had actually gotten a call the night before. You could see on Twitter the night before at about 10:30. I posted and said, what if they go conference games only? I mean, it was one of those deals where a friend had heard it from a good source, like another friend in the business. And it's like if you don't hear it yourself, you just can't go with it as a story. Even if you trust your friend, love your friend, and you know your friend has good source, if I don't hear it with my own 2 ears, I just can't go with it. So, but what I could do, I said, well, I'll put this out on Twitter as a possibility. And sure enough, it happened. They ended up going 10 games, conference only. And the first thing that a lot of people thought and a lot of people said was that this was the SEC's response to the ACC catching them off guard the day before. Now, we talked with Greg McGarity yesterday at Georgia, and McGarity said that actually that's not true. The SEC athletic directors had their phone call before the ACC announcement. So early in the program, I'm jumping on here right now as you typically. This is when I ask that we share this. We're going to talk about some SEC-wide stuff, and if you could share this post around, that would be great. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share it to my Facebook page so that all my Facebook friends can catch this. I've had a few text messages. It's like I'm on the road. I'm wondering, well, do I go live? Do I not go live? And I had a few friends say, hey, are you going to do this? And I said, well, okay. Since somebody asked, I'm definitely going to do it. So let me go ahead and share the show. And I would ask you to do the same if you've got some SEC friends. And because we're going to talk about the SEC schedule model, how that compares with other leagues. We're going to talk about bowl games. And we're going to talk about the possible teams that each SEC team could add. And there's a lot of people that are kind of complaining, saying, well, this team could get an advantage or that team could get an advantage. And I don't know. I'm kind of like, to me, I think you need to go with the next two games that you would cross over into, something that's kind of pre-prescribed instead of, if you try to do it, to me, if you try to do it like draw names out of a hat by chance, that's not the way you want to do it. And if somebody, I think Mark Whitworth is going to handle this. He's one of the SEC associate commissioners, a good guy. He's been there a long time. He's a really sharp guy. Like Mark a lot, but I'm just not sure you can have somebody sit down and say, okay, here's the most even way to add two different games to the schedule. To me, that I just don't think you can do that. I think that's going to cause more problems than it's worth. I'm not sure how people are going to feel about that if you were to try it that way. So, a couple quick shares here, and boom. There we go. So let's go ahead and back up. If we look at what happened, where we're at, the Big Ten, the Pac-12, they were the first ones to go out there, and they were the first ones to go 10 games conference only. And I think it's kind of interesting. Let me adjust my camera here. I think it's kind of interesting because when they jumped out there with that model, I'm not so sure how we all felt about it. I'm not sure that we all felt real good about what the Big Ten and the Pac-12 was doing when they said 10 games conference only. We were all like, wow, they're really jumping out fast on this. What do we think about that? Well, obviously the Big Ten and the Pac-12, they're just going to do what's best for them. And they explained that they did their conference only model because they wanted to be able to control the scheduling. And, if you have teams from other conferences, maybe they don't have the same COVID-19 protocol, right? Or maybe you get into some contract situations where they have an outbreak and you can't play the game, or you have an outbreak and they're upset that you don't play the game. There's some buyout issues right there. So the Pac-10 and the Pac-12 and the Big Ten idea, I guess the more the SEC thought about it, they thought, maybe that's not such a bad thing. And then, of course, the ACC decision when they go 10 plus 1. Now, I'm going to give the ACC credit. I know a lot of people are kind of sneering or sniping at it. I think this is a great idea if you're the ACC to add Notre Dame. If ever there was a conference that needed to add Notre Dame to get a little bit of credibility, it's the ACC, because we all look at it as, Clemson and the rest of the league. We really haven't seen a team that's risen up and challenged Clemson in that conference championship game. Now, Pitt beat them. Syracuse has played them close. But I think we all kind of pencil Clemson into the playoffs every year just because we think they're that much better than the rest of the league. Now, can you blame Clemson for that? Not really. You got to give Dabo Swinney a lot of credit. He's done a great job building that program. He was out front with that football building. They've recruited very aggressively, gotten a lot of kids out of the Southeast, and they beat Alabama. Oh, by the way, they beat Alabama, something that a lot of teams in the SEC couldn't do. So Clemson's legit, and it's hard to hold it against them that they play in a conference that's just not as deep. Now, this isn't just my opinion. You can just look at the NFL draft, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's quite a discrepancy between the number of players from the SEC that are drafted in the ACC. So the ACC arguments really don't hold a lot of water. Now they can go, well, North Carolina played South Carolina, and this and that happened, and Clemson beat Alabama. But if you did a thorough evaluation of the ACC versus the SEC, the talent discrepancy is pretty obvious every year come the NFL draft. So I thought it was a great move for the ACC. I thought it was a great move for Notre Dame. I mean, I'm interested, right? I'm interested in watching some of these ACC teams. Certainly, I'll be interested in the Clemson-Notre Dame game. Notre Dame proved pretty legit when they came to Georgia last year. Let me tell you, the Notre Dame coaching staff out-coached Kirby Smart and his staff for that Georgia game. And the reason that Georgia beat Notre Dame last year was the Sanford Stadium crowd. There were 6 false start penalties. Now, Georgia fans already know all this. But if you weren't watching closely, there were 6 motion penalties in that game that had a huge effect. If that game's at a neutral site or if that game's at Notre Dame, I believe Notre Dame beats Georgia. So I'm going to tell you, keep your eye on Notre Dame Clemson. I've covered some games at Notre Dame. I know a lot of you SEC fans have traveled there. I'm going to tell you, some strange things happen. There's a lot to be said for the luck of the Irish. I covered a Michigan State Notre Dame game in 2013. There were 5 pass interference penalties in that game against Michigan State. And there were some noises coming that I don't think were coming from the band. And oh, by the way, some of the news today, the ACC has said they're not going to allow bands on the field. That bothers me. I understand, and we've talked about how we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. We've all got to make sacrifices. But that's disappointing. That's disheartening that there's not going to be any bands there. To me, that's part of the college football pageantry, just like the fans, right? We're seeing all these different attendance models out there, 20%, 25%. I think Ohio State said 20%. I did see Texas A&M is still saying they're hoping to get 50% in there. Listen, that's a big stadium with 112,000 seats. I've been there too, and it looks like it's so brand new. It's really an incredible game day environment. If you can do it social distancing, I'm fine. But right now, my senses, my spidey senses, right, are tingling with the COVID-19. The trends are very scary in the South. I think you all have kept up with that. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm not the guy that stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, and I'm not going to try and tell you, I'm an expert on it. But it looks to me like this 6 or 7 week burnout model is the best that we can hope for. You hope that, some of these states that are hot states right now, they go through this 6 or 7 week projection, and then there's a drop off like maybe some of the states in the North or the Midwest. That's me hoping. That's not me being an expert, but that's me just telling you my Reader's Digest version of what we're all hoping for. The complication that all the SEC schools are looking at, and one of the reasons that I believe they chose September 26th, is the kids coming back to class. These campuses are going to be rushed, quite literally. I know at Georgia the classes start on August 20th. That means the move-in date's in 2 weeks. There's some public schools in Georgia that begin next week with no masks and the kids in school. So let's wait and see what happens. And really that's where Greg Sankey is at with this, is they're going to do everything they can to make this happen, but they're going to have to make it happen safely. It was a couple of weeks ago when Greg Sankey compared the process right now to running out a ground ball. He said, we've got an obligation, and he knows there's been some criticism. There's been some people, maybe outside of sports, maybe you can say it's political. I don't know. That would be up to your interpretation. And people saying, how in the world can you think about playing football amid this crisis? And Sankey said, well, what am I supposed to do? Just throw up my arms and not try? So, his task is to try to make football happen. They are consulting with some of the best doctors in the world, quite frankly, and they're going to do everything they can to be responsible with this decision. And I think September 26th was a great decision. Now, the one key point, and I suppose if you look at some of the other schedule models and you say, well, Mike, the Big 12, they're going to start, there's a couple of non-conference games. Oklahoma plays Missouri State and Kansas plays Southern Illinois on August 29th. And they're doing that so that they have a bigger window of flexibility if you start in August. But I think Sankey and the SEC wanted to wait so that they could get a read on what's happening with other conferences that start earlier. The ACC model starts on September 12th, and the NFL. And remember, Greg Sankey has said from the beginning that he wanted to get as much information as possible before having to start the season or make a decision. And that's just responsible. Now, I see some people that are throwing comments up and dollar signs and things like that. And I would just tell you this. I would tell you a couple of things. Number one, all businesses are moving forward. The economy affects everyone. So it's no shame that college football generates revenue. In fact, because of college football, it creates opportunities for other athletes. These athletes have a 3 to 5 year window where they can compete and have a chance to advance their careers, particularly college football. I would also tell you this. I think the NCAA, and I know the SEC has said this, and I would bet that this is going to be across the board. They've already told the student athletes, look, if you don't want to compete this year, you will remain in good standing and not lose any eligibility. So this is freedom. You could choose to do whatever you want. No one's going to make these kids play any more than anybody's going to make you go to work or make me go to work. It's our choice. Me personally, I feel an obligation. I've worked hard to get to where I'm at in my career, and I'm going to work, and I'm going to try and produce product, and I'm going to try to cover SEC football and Georgia football as good as I can, and I'm going to take the measured risks that are necessary to support my family. And that's my choice. And that's what we get to do in America. We get to have that freedom to make those decisions. So why wouldn't those college athletes have the freedom to make their decision? Why wouldn't those college programs? You talk about the optics of it. Well, what about the optics of the Lexus dealership down the road? What about the optics of the restaurants that are open, the fast food places, the optics of any corporation moving forward? There's two choices. You either move forward or you don't. And I think that it's up to people to make those decisions. So when people start trying to beat up college football and take shots at athletics for moving forward, they need to take a look in the mirror and ask them if they're moving forward with their life. Are you going to work every day? Is your company continuing to produce product? I hope so, because we need that to happen. Because the flip side of this that nobody wants to talk about is if we shut down, there's unintended consequences, all right? And that's just where I'm going to leave it. That's enough talk about COVID. You know where I stand. That's my opinion on it. I don't want anybody to feel guilty, though, that college football wants to give these student athletes an opportunity to move forward. Because I think that the people in charge, the presidents, the athletic directors, the commissioners, I think they're being very responsible with this, and they're doing this in the best way that they can to protect the student athlete, both their health and their right to pursue their ambition. And there's something to be said for that amid what we call the cancel culture, right? Everybody's a critic, right? All you got to do is go on Twitter. I can promise you, right? If I'm having too good of a day and I need to be brought down, all I need to do is go on Twitter, and it won't take long before I find somebody that disagreed with me about something at some point in my career. So I want to talk a little bit about now the schedule model. The SEC going to a 10-game schedule, and a few weeks ago, or I guess it was a couple weeks ago, when the Big Ten and the Pac-12 went to this model, and my mind immediately jumped forward, and I thought, wow, what if the SEC does this? How would they go about adding the two teams? And to me, the most logical way is to go with the schedule that's already there. Don't try and fix what's there now. Don't throw the cards up in the air and pick out of a hat or anything like that. Who would be the next two opponents that the teams would play from the opposite division? And that was just what came to my mind logically. Now, I take a look at this, and there would be winners and there would be losers. Now, I see someone's asking me, when will the schedules be out? Not today, not this weekend, okay? The SEC is going to work on it. They've already said that. Herb Vincent, the associate commissioner, put out a tweet earlier today that the schedule is not done yet. Now, the reason that they didn't put out a schedule is because when they were voting on different models, whether they wanted to go 10 games plus one, or maybe stick with 8 conference games, play regular schedule, is they didn't want the refined, I don't know, what do we call it, refined, redesigned. They didn't want the redone schedule to affect the vote of the teams. They didn't want somebody to go, ooh, look, these are the 2 teams I'm picking up. No, let's not do that. They wanted the athletic directors to make this decision as much in a vacuum as possible. They already know the 8 teams they're playing, but nobody knows who the next 2 teams would be. Now, it seems to me that the only fair way to do this, again, is to accelerate the cycle of the cross-division teams. What do I mean by that? So I'm going to use Georgia for an example. That's the team I cover. This podcast, obviously, we're on Dog Nation. So Georgia next year would play a home game with Arkansas. And the following year, they would play Mississippi State. And that's just the way the rotation goes. Now, some people are going, oh, yeah, well, isn't that awful convenient? And to be quite honest with you, yes, if they went with that model, Georgia would be one of the winners. I think Auburn would be one of the winners, too. Auburn would play at South Carolina and home against Missouri. That would be the 2 teams they would pick up. I think that's a winner. Some of the tough draws, Florida would get a tough draw. They would get a home game with Alabama, and then they would play at Texas A&M. I think Missouri would get a tough draw. They would play home against A&M and at Auburn. The rest of the teams, it looks like you kind of pick up one upper half of the division team and one lower half of the division team. But what nobody's talking about, and what kind of sticks in my craw a little bit, is everybody's going, oh, well, this team picks up easy, and this team, but what about what's already there? You know, we can't pretend that everybody right now is at ground zero in terms of who their intra-division games are against. Some teams have tougher draws than others. And this is where Tennessee raises their hand and said, hey, we play Alabama every year. We don't want to hear it, okay? And yes, that is bad luck for Tennessee. I think that's cost Tennessee. I think that's kind of held Tennessee back. But you know what? In the same breath, Tennessee will tell you that's a traditional rival. And a lot of people say they want to fight to keep it. So, you can't have it both ways. We're going to talk about Georgia Tech later. Georgia's not playing Georgia Tech. I say, so what? But there's some people in the Georgia fan base that are doing backflips upset about it. I don't know why, because I don't know anybody outside of a very small circle that really cares about Georgia Tech. But that's for discussion a little bit later. But if you look at who the teams are, I'm going to go through this right now. And I'm going to suppose, and I want to be very clear, nothing has been decided. Nobody has said what schedule model that the SEC is going to go with. But I'm going to go through who the teams play right now from the other division, and then who they would add. Okay, so let's start with Alabama. Right now, Alabama's got a pretty tough slate. They play at home against Georgia, and they play at Tennessee. We know for a fact that Alabama will play those 2 games. If we did the accelerated cross-division, Alabama would then also play at Florida and have a home game against Vanderbilt. So, you look at Alabama's schedule, you go, okay, Georgia, Florida, you're probably playing the 2 top teams in the East, and Tennessee might even be the 3rd best team. You get Vanderbilt, and everybody's going to beat Vanderbilt. But that's a pretty tough draw for Alabama. If we look at Arkansas, they're really not relevant. I don't think Arkansas is going to compete in the West, but Arkansas already has a home game with Tennessee and plays at Missouri. Arkansas would pick a game up at Georgia and a home game against South Carolina, which to me is okay. So Arkansas, I think they'd be fine. Auburn already plays a home game with Kentucky and at Georgia. As I said earlier, they would pick up a game at South Carolina and home against Missouri. I think this would be very favorable for Auburn if they went with the accelerated cross-divisional games. LSU already plays at Florida, home to South Carolina. LSU would pick up a game at Kentucky, home against Tennessee. I think that's a push. I think that's mostly favorable. I think Tennessee could have some teeth this year. I don't expect much out of Vanderbilt. Very sad to me that Vanderbilt doesn't give their coaches and players better facilities and equal footing to compete. That's very sad to me that in a city like Nashville of growth, that Nashville's leadership has done such a poor job. And quite frankly, really since Roy Kramer was the AD there long ago, Vanderbilt's been on a slide. We saw James Franklin do some great things at Vanderbilt and show you that, yes, they can compete. Derek Mason, I think he gave it his best foot forward, but you just can't compete when you don't have facilities. And Vanderbilt, case in point. Ole Miss already plays at Vanderbilt this year, home to Florida. They would pick up at Tennessee and home to Kentucky. Look, I know everybody wants to see Lane Kiffin go into Neyland Stadium this year, so we're all kind of rooting for that to happen. An Ole Miss-Tennessee game would be great for the league. A&M already plays at South Carolina, home to Vandy. That's a pretty weak draw. A&M would pick up at Missouri and home to Florida. I think A&M's got a very favorable schedule. That may be why so many people are picking A&M to make a move in the West. Very favorable schedule compared to Alabama. Florida already home to LSU and at Ole Miss. This is where the Gator tears start coming. They would have to play home against Alabama and at A&M. That is a tough draw. No two ways about it. But I'm going to be honest with you. I look at the league history of late. I think Florida seems to get a lot of nods, right? I think most of the SEC would go, oh yeah. Florida's kind of had their way over the year. If Florida's got to bite the bullet this year, I don't think there's too many SEC teams that'd be crying about that. And listen, the Gators have done it. It's a proud program. It does appear to be on their way back. I think they're still a year or two away from being ready to compete with Georgia. Georgia with so much talent. Georgia, as we talked about earlier, already plays at Alabama, home to Auburn. If you go to this cross-divisional schedule, then Georgia would benefit greatly. They would have a home game against Virginia and at Mississippi State. Kentucky at Auburn, home to Mississippi State right now. They would be home to LSU at Ole Miss. I think that'd be good for Kentucky. See Kentucky and Tennessee battling out maybe for that third place spot. Missouri, every time we seem to count Missouri out, they win the East. I don't think that's going to happen this year. Missouri already at Mississippi State, home to Arkansas. Very easy cross-division games. They would pick up home game with A&M and at Auburn. Balance that out a little bit, right? Tennessee already home to Alabama at Arkansas. They pick up that home game with Ole Miss at LSU. I think that's a tough draw, but I think Vols fans would be glad to do it just to get a chance of taking Lane Kiffin down in Neyland Stadium. And so that's kind of how that whole deal looks. Now, bowl games. This is interesting. I've had a lot of people ask me, do I think there's going to be bowl games? And I think it's really too early to know because we don't know what COVID-19 is going to do. And Sankey has said from the start that COVID-19 model would determine what was going to happen with college football this season. I think we've seen that already play out with the way the SEC's delayed the start of the season until September 26th. But the bowl games, now remember, they make about 30 or 40% of their money off of the tickets. But they also make a lot of money off of sponsors and off of television. So it's possible that you could have bowl games even if you had this 20 to 25% or hopefully 50% model if we're being conservative, even if it's not super well attended. My buddy Dennis Dodd at CBS Sports did some really good work and some good interviews. And I'm going to quote some of the people that Dennis spoke to about the bowl games. And this is Brett Gilliland, who's a member of the NCAA Football Oversight Committee. And here's what he said. He said, there's still communities out there, TV partners and sponsors, that want to do this, that want to do the bowl games. From the other side of the equations, he said he's never talked to a coach or a student athlete who ever said that the bowl experience was a bad thing. And that the marketplace at large still want bowl games. I'm on board with that. Who are the people that don't want bowl games? I mean, if you don't like it, don't watch it. But I've always enjoyed the bowl season. I've always enjoyed seeing different matchups. Sometimes there's some fantastic games that just pop out of nowhere. And you say, geez, I don't even know where the school's at. And what a great game this is. The Bahamas Bowl a couple years ago was fantastic. I'll never forget the Michigan State Baylor Cotton Bowl, 4 years ago when Baylor was up 3 touchdowns going in the fourth quarter. I mean, I've got memories from bowl games, and I'm sure you do too. I bet we all do. Now, yeah, there's some games and you go, is anybody even watching this? But you know what? Somebody is, because college football, more than any other sport, is regionalized, right? The people in the Northwest think, hey, listen, I lived out in Idaho for a couple years. Let me tell you, BYU was the Notre Dame of the Intermountain region. I mean, they thought BYU and Lavelle Edwards, and rest in peace, Lavelle Edwards was a fantastic coach, won that 84. But that BYU to them was Notre Dame. And I grew up in Michigan, and Notre Dame and the influence of Notre Dame and Bo Schembechler in Michigan. But down in the Southeast, Ball Bear Bryant and Auburn and Vince Dooley and Georgia and Steve Spurrier, for goodness sakes. And then you get into that Atlantic Coast and Virginia Tech and Frank Beamer and the work he did. And let me tell you, those Syracuse fans, they love their orange. I kind of sit back and go, well, I don't know. But you know what? I saw Donovan McNabb darn near end Tennessee's national championship run in 1998 before it even got started. And of course, we don't even need to talk about Texas. We know so it's a very regionalized game, and the bowl season enables these different regions to rally around their teams. So I don't think we should be rooting against this. Now, I understand that as it sits, there's 41 bowl games, and that's about 65% of the college football teams that are involved. But I like that. I like it that teams can end the season with a win. You know, in college basketball, only one team ends the season with a win, and that's a bummer. I've seen some great college basketball teams, and because the NCAA tournament didn't go well, or because they got a bad draw, you know, it was over, and they just get lost. I mean, Tom Crean in Indiana, one year, I thought they had the best basketball team wire to wire during the regular season. They run into that funky Syracuse 2-3 and get eliminated, and it's like the season didn't even happen. That's the disappointing thing about and everybody else loves March Madness, but for me, I enjoy the process in the season. I've been covering sports a long time. I give a lot of respect to teams that win regular season championships. That's why that Alabama team that lost to Clemson 2 years ago, I'll always remember them, because they beat everybody by 22 or 23 points or more, and that hadn't happened since the 1800s. Now, Tua got injured, and then Georgia re-injured him, and Alabama was not the same Alabama that played Clemson. Listen, I don't want to take anything away from Clemson. Clemson fans are very sensitive about that. Give Clemson all the credit. They won that game, but if Clemson and Alabama had played that year in September, folks, I'm telling you, Alabama would have won that game by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Remember, Clemson was struggling, had a quarterback change the first half of the season. So some thoughts on bowl games there, and I hope that they go forward with it. Want to dial it a little bit closer into the Georgia audience now, and Georgia's kind of going through this deal with tradition, and I think every school's got their traditions that they love and care about. But Georgia, you know, this Jacksonville game, this came out a little bit earlier this week, and you know, this is Georgia's year to have a designated home game with Florida, and with COVID-19 going down, and with limited attendance, and right now no tailgating in a lot of these stadium models, I don't know why Georgia would give up a designated home game to play Florida and Jacksonville. Well, you say tradition, you realize, you know, everybody else in the league is going to have 5 home games. Georgia's going to have 4. And they're saying they're going to do that on their own volition, you know. But whose volition? The ADs, the president. I'm going to say keep an eye on that. I don't think that ship has sailed yet. And Georgia AD said unless something changes. I noticed that the Texas A&M AD, they were supposed to play Arkansas and Dallas, and they said, you know what? We're not doing it. We're not going to play Texas A&M and we're going to make that our home game. Now maybe next year they got to play back at Arkansas. That next year is next year. We don't know about next year yet. So when the Georgia AD came back and said the other day, well, if we were to play a home game this year, then we would have to play in Georgia in front of Florida at 93,000. Would you? Do we already know there's going to be 90? Do we know that we're going to have full attendance next year? I don't know that. I don't know what crystal ball he's looking into, number one. And number two, who says Florida wouldn't want the game back in Jacksonville? The contract goes through 2023. For all we know, Jacksonville may want to let that game go because they're going to go, you know, usually we get $35 million economic impact, but this year, and if you're Georgia, why do you want to put your kids in that stadium? You don't control how it's sanitized. Why do you want to put your kids on an airplane? So to me, I think this is a time where schools, athletic directors, I think you got to put the student athletes ahead of your traditions. So that's why it didn't bother me when the Georgia Tech game was canceled. I get it. It's been played every year since 1925. I understand. I can appreciate that. But not all traditions are good. I mean, there's some traditions out there that are downright lousy. If it's a lousy game, then why do you want to keep playing it? I mean, I don't get it. To me, if you're Georgia, why are you giving up a home game to play Georgia Tech? Why are you going on the road? Use that for Clemson. Use that for somebody. Use that for Notre Dame. You know, and you look into the future in Georgia, you see a lot of these schools. Alabama now is scheduling more aggressively. Folks, they're doing that because they're anticipating an 8-game playoff down the road. Now, Monday night, here on our Dog Nation channel, we're going to have Bill Hancock. We're scheduled to have Bill Hancock on. He's in charge of the college football playoffs. Really excited about that. I've known Bill for years and years and years. He knows I thought Georgia belonged in the playoff 2 years ago. Still not sure what I think about this 13-person committee voting on this, especially when there's sitting athletic directors involved. Not sure how I feel about that. But listen, Bill's going to come out. He's going to talk, and it'll be very interesting to hear what he says about the college football playoffs and how these different schedule models are going to affect how the teams are chosen. Because you know what we're going to lose this year that we've had in the past is the whole transitive properties thing. You know, Team A played Team B from Conference A and Conference B, and it won, and so then Team B would be. We don't have that. We were not going to have as many transitive properties to play with. That may be a good thing because, you know, we've all played that game. Well, this team beat this team, and this team beat this team, and this team. And if we did it long enough, it completed a full circle, right? So now we don't know what the Big 12 is going to do. Their ADs held a call today. Their presidents are going to talk on Monday. Right now, the reports that are coming out is that the Big 12 is leaning towards a 10-game +1 schedule. I know that they're also looking at playing a 9-game conference schedule plus 3 non-conference. But right now, it's thought that the Big 12 is looking at that +1 schedule that's similar to what the ACC is doing. Obviously, they don't have Notre Dame plugged in. I don't know if I think, you know, if you play 1 or 2 less games, I don't think that makes a big difference. Certainly, it didn't affect Notre Dame. You know, they haven't played in a conference championship game or they've played 1 game less. So, yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts. And I'll take a look here at some of the questions. I kind of wanted to, make tonight's program as tight as I could. You know, get to the information because a lot's happened in the last week as far as start dates, as far as scheduling models. College football is really flying around. I see someone's asking about bye weeks. So what the SEC has said is there's going to be 2 bye weeks, and you're going to see on December 12th, there's going to be a bye week for the whole league, right? Because the conference championship game now is scheduled for December 19th. Everybody in the league is off December 12th. Then there's going to be a 3-week span where different teams in the middle of the season, where different teams are going to have bye weeks. So that's how they're going to do that. Obviously, the schedule's not out yet, but you could probably look for that to happen mid-October to early November, because it looks like December 5th right now is going to be the last week of the regular season, and everybody will play. So what else do you got for me here, guys? If you got any other questions about these schedule models, about some of the things that have transpired, I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. It's been a very busy week. I know at Georgia, the Georgia football team was in Sanford Stadium today. There's some video of that out. That's exciting for Georgia fans. You know, any sniff, every hint, any picture they can get, you know, because Georgia's got so much coming back. There's a lot of teams that are looking at championship runs. That Alabama offense with those receivers, so dynamic, and the question is defense. And, you know, to me, interesting and ironic that a question about a Nick Saban team would be the defense. So going to be very interesting. I see some people talking about Clemson coming to a grown man's conference. Like I said, there's no doubt about it that the ACC is not as deep and not as talented, and yet still Clemson's had those tough games. You know, Pat Narduzzi and Pitt knocked him off. You know, Syracuse, and then they had the close call with North Carolina last year. I mean, it is what it is. You know, it's hard for any team to get up every single week, even Clemson in the ACC, but I do think it's fair to say that they have more of a margin for error. So, man, it's been a tight program. It's been a fun program. You know, I wanted to get the information out to you as succinctly as possible. I wanted to throw a couple of opinions out there. Don't know when the new schedules are going to come out. You know, I think it would be really cool, and I don't know if you guys agree with me, but you know, the SEC network does such a great job. And I'm not talking about turning this into a circus, but wouldn't it be cool if they had like a schedule reveal show? You know, whether they did it on the Paul Feinbaum show or whether they brought in Jesse Palmer or Tim Tebow and they did a schedule. I know I'd be watching, you know, and they'd say, guys, here's game 1 of the season, and then talk about the week 1 reveal of the SEC schedule. I'd like to see the SEC do that. And it's not Greg Sankey's, you know, way necessarily to turn it into a circuit. But right now, I don't know about you all, but I think I'm starving for college football entertainment. And a reveal show would be a lot of fun. If you did a college football reveal show, you could put some highlight packages together. You could have a quick analysis on each of the games. I think that would be a blast if they were to program it like that. I know when I covered the Big Ten, they used to do that with their all Big Ten teams. I thought that was very clever, the Big Ten network. So maybe the SEC network will have something like that going. You know, that'll be kind of interesting for me. Now, guys, if you want to catch me on Twitter, I'm at Mike Griffith 32. I love talking college football. I do some radio in Athens on the Ref Show every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. I also do the three-man front show on WJOX in Birmingham, typically on Mondays at 2:30. But next week it's going to be on Tuesday at 2:30 because WJOX is going to have their version of SEC Media Days. And then, of course, I do the show with Bill King in Nashville on Tuesday mornings at 9:30. And then Dog Nation Daily is a program we're very proud of. Brandon Adams hosts that every day at 10 o'clock. You're going to get your fill of SEC football and Georgia football with Brandon Adams on Dog Nation Daily. Connor Riley is another member of our team that does a Tuesday night show. Wednesday night, we have, I think, the best recruiting show in the South with Jeff Sentel before the hedges. So all sorts of great stuff. We also did a program, a Cover 4 yesterday, where we just went off. I mean, we went at each other. I hope Brandon's not mad at me. I hope Jeff's not mad at me. This is a show where we're all sitting in 4 different rooms, literally yelling at each other about different topics. And I guess we're still friends because our morning call went well, but you can watch the show for yourself and decide. And that's up right now on our Dog Nation channel as well as on YouTube. So I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight. I want to tell you, keep your antennas up, be safe, mask up. I think we're at the height of this thing. I think right now is a time to be very careful, folks. And let's get through this, okay? Because college football season's coming and we need to have the numbers that are going to make Sankey and these other commissioners push the buttons and say, we're doing this. So everybody have a great weekend, a safe weekend. Thanks for joining me tonight on Friday Night Mike.